I apologize for being all over the place. I'm Mindy Domb. I'm the state rep for the 3rd Hampshire District, and the 3rd Hampshire District includes the entire town of Amherst and half of the town of Granby. And as Susan mentioned, I've started my 4th term. I was first elected in 2019. Legislative sessions are 2 years long, so we'll talk about that today, which means that everybody in the state legislature is up for re-election on the even year, every even year. So going into my 4th term, I was really honored this year to be appointed by the Speaker of the House as House Chair of the Joint Committee on Mental Health, Substance Use and Recovery. We can talk a little bit about that if you have questions. Last year, I was the House Chair of the Joint Committee on Tourism, Arts, and Cultural Development. We used to call it the Committee on Fun and Games. And that was a delightful committee because it was really about celebrating some of the best things about Massachusetts. And this session's committee is really a very kind of complicated and deep committee with a real potential for helping people who are our most vulnerable folks in the Commonwealth. So I'm just really happy to be in that position. I'm going to talk a little bit about what the state government does and what our timeline is on that and how you can plug in. I'll try to take breaks. So if you have questions in sections, you should also feel free to either put a question in the chat or raise your hand if something I said isn't clear or misunderstood. I'm also going to try and take a break at about 4:45. As Susan mentioned, the House today released midday a draft supplemental budget. It's not a closeout budget, meaning it's not a budget that says, okay, so in order for us to finish the year and pay all of our expenses, here's a budget. This is a budget that's going to deal with the money that was raised by the fair share tax this year that has not yet been designated or allocated. And so we're allowed, obviously, to submit amendments, but we have very little time to do that. So the budget comes out at around noon. The deadline for amendments is 4:59. My office, we've already started developing those amendments, but at 4:45, I want to take a quick break, contact my staff director, and just make sure everything is copacetic and ready to go. And we can move on from there. And I can talk about what those amendments are later on if you'd like. I wasn't planning on talking about it because I didn't know the budget was coming out. So, hi, I'm thrilled to be here with you. I'm going to move my own slides, which I haven't done before while I'm talking, so I should be able to do this. And I hope that you feel comfortable asking questions as you have them. And Susan, please, stop me if someone has a question. Just tell me to be quiet or, that you have a question from an audience member.
Not a problem. I'll keep track of things.
Thank you. I was thrilled that I was asked to do this because there are several issues and pieces of legislation that are kicking around specifically about elders. But there's also, the state deals with a whole range of issues that everybody cares about and that I've heard a lot about from older residents in Amherst, whether it be climate change, environmental protection, education funding, public health. All of that happens on the state level. And as you might have heard, with the new administration in Washington, many people are saying that the states are where we have to look for leadership and for action. And so at the Massachusetts state legislature, we are ready for this. And we can talk more about what does being ready mean in a little bit. So there are 2 main responsibilities for legislators, in addition to helping residents navigate state services. Meaning, if you have a problem with like the Registry of Motor Vehicles or the Department of Revenue or the Agriculture Resource Department or the Environmental Protection Department, you should always call your state legislator to help navigate the infrastructure, the process, and the result. And I'm your state rep, and you and I both have a fantastic state senator, and that's Joe Comerford. And Joe and I often work in partnership on ideas, issues, and things that are happening in our shared area. But her Senate district is much larger than my House district. So it also includes places like Northampton, Greenfield, Orange, and other places. Mine only, as I said, involves Amherst and Granby. But there are two main responsibilities I have to the state as your rep. One is to participate in the creation of budgets, and the other is to make policy that hopefully makes life better in Massachusetts. So keep in mind that each legislative session is 2 years, starting with, we get elected in the even year, but we get sworn in on January of the first odd year. And then we have 2 years to do a bunch of work. What is that work? Well, every year we have to develop a budget, and that starts in January and goes through July. So right now, we're in April. We are in the beginning of April. We are smack dab in the middle of budget development season. And I'm going to talk about what that means. But at the same time, after people get sworn in January, we have about 3 weeks to file legislation and to come up with bills, write bills, and file them, and they get numbers. You're all familiar with it. First, they get HD, 1, 2, 3. Then when they get assigned to a committee, they become just House bills. This year, there are about 7,000 bills that have been introduced by senators and representatives from across the state. Every single one of those bills, by rules, is supposed to get a public hearing. They don't necessarily have to get their own public hearing, thankfully, but they're grouped together maybe with similar bills, but they need to get a public hearing, which is the public's opportunity to tell the legislature why they support or oppose the bill and what they want us to do with it. So bills get filed. The clerk in both the Senate and the House kind of play traffic cop with those bills, sorting them between different committees that have different responsibilities. And then once the committees get their bills, then they start to think about a schedule for those public hearings. And that can take place over the full 2 years of the legislative session. I'm going to take a moment. Any questions? I just dumped a lot of information.
No typed in comments yet.
Okay, so we have a 2-year session. We have 2 main areas of responsibility in Boston. Create a budget every year. And it goes from January to June to July, and then it's for the next fiscal year. The fiscal year in Massachusetts is July 1 to June 30th. And make policy to make the Commonwealth a more equitable, healthier, better place to live. And that can take place over the 2-year session. I asked on this slide, what is a state legislative issue? And like I mentioned before, it could be anything having to do with state land, state environmental policy, state energy policy, education policy, policy that deals with children and families and persons with disabilities, mental health, substance use, tourism, arts, culture, economic development. There are like many committees in the legislature, and they all review bills and then advise on what should happen with those bills. Should they move on and potentially get voted on by the full House, or do they need more work? So we're here. It's kind of a fork in the road, but we have to take both paths simultaneously. So one side is the budget and one side is legislation. And both right now are happening at the same time. You might have heard that there are hearings going on across the state looking at the budget. One was held at UMass Amherst a couple of weeks ago on education funding. They're happening all over the state. I think they're wrapping up tomorrow in Boston. And we also right now have just received all the bills that the clerk has assigned to us, and committees across the legislature are looking at the bills they have, seeing how many they have, what are the topics, and starting to think about scheduling hearings for the public. So the budget legislation's been filed and assigned, committee work begins. And we are dealing with potentially some new rules that will change the way committees work, but rest assured that if they're passed, and I hope they do pass, there'll be more transparency, and there'll also be an expedited track for legislation, with the hope that more bills will come to the floor for a vote. We've heard the concerns of a lot of people in the state that have said we don't do a lot. So we're looking to move bills further along. I should say, though, we do a lot, but sometimes we do it in the form of an omnibus bill, which is a big bill on a topic where a lot of bills, maybe 20 bills, are sort of different sections of that big bill. That's what we did last session. We did a lot of omnibus bills on mental health, on maternal health, on gun safety, a whole range of ones, public health. But I think the voter felt that there wasn't enough numbers of bills and they wanted to see more voting. So part of the new rules is supposed to help us churn out more bills and bring them onto the floor for votes. So I give the credit on these next two slides to my partner, Senator Comerford. She and I have presented information on the budget process and on the legislative process to different groups, and we've developed these slides together. This is merely Joe's thought process, though, which I love. And this tells you the time frame for the state budget process. Remember, it's 1 year because every year we need to create a budget, which means every session we need to create 2 budgets. And you can see, although I don't think I can actually point to the slide as I would if I was there in person. If you go all the way on the left side, the fall executive office budgets, that's when the governor and her team start to think about what do they think the budget should look like. They're the ones who are implementing the programs. What programs do they think need more money, less money? Where do they want to save money? How are they doing that? And then she comes out with a budget that she will provide to the legislature in January. And that budget is actually the focus of those hearings that are happening around the state, where we are, the legislature is asking her administrators, why did you pick this amount of money for this project? And why did you cut this program by this much money? In between these two things, the fall and January, the Department of Revenue comes out with what they think is going to be how much money Massachusetts is going to bring in the next year. If anybody has developed budgets for an organization, you know that this is really key, right? You have to kind of project how much money are we going to have to spend, because we can't deficit spend at the state level. We only can spend what we take in. So this shared idea of what the revenue is becomes the basis for building a budget for both the House and the Senate and the governor. Any questions before I go on? Am I talking too fast or it's okay? Slow down. Okay.
You're doing fine.
Okay, I come from the New Jersey, New York area originally, so sometimes I tend to speed up in my speech. I don't mean to. So January, the governor releases her budget. We have the hearings. In April, the month we're in fact, the week before school vacation week, the House will release its budget. And this budget is going to be based on not only what we heard from the Ways and Means hearings that have gone on, but every legislator, including me, gets an opportunity to sit down with Ways and Means and tell them what my local priorities are and what my statewide priorities are for the next year. And House Ways and Means, both the chairman and his staff, taken all of these ideas and requests. There's 160 reps, and they use that with the House Ways and Means but hearings that have happened, the revenue that's been coming in, and I'll talk about Trump in a minute, and they create a House budget that then gets released the Wednesday before school vacation week. I think that this year, I'm just going to pull up my calendar if I may, that is I believe it is the 16th. And today, you know, I've told you that I have till like 4:59 to submit amendments for the supplemental budget for tomorrow. When this budget comes out, I'll have 2 days to submit amendments. Still not enough time. There's a lot of things to do. That's where people put in their local earmarks or their local investments, and where they try to increase the amount of money in different programs. If programs have not even been budgeted, they'll try to put programs back in. And the amendments are handled like legislation, where we submit it and people, our colleagues, can co-sponsor them And we have an opportunity before we vote on each of these parts of the budget to advocate for them in front of each other. It's probably my most fun thing is to hear my colleagues advocate for their local priorities, because I not only get a chance to hear them advocate, which I don't always get a chance to hear them do that, but I also get a chance to find out and learn about their districts and what's important to their districts. And that's endlessly interesting in a lot of ways, but most importantly, because I find out if we have any common interests and shared priorities, so I can work with people in the future on something that's important to Amherst and Granby that maybe I didn't know was important to that legislator before. Then, so we get our budget the Wednesday before that week. We submit amendments that Friday. The next week, House Ways and Means goes through all those amendments, and there's usually a ton of amendments, up to 2,000 sometimes, and they sort them out by different departments. And then the following week, we come back, and that is budget week in the House, and that's the last week of April. In that week, we will advocate and we will debate different parts of the budget, and we will vote on different parts of the budget. And at the end of the week, there will be a House budget, and it goes to the Senate, where the next month in May, they do their thing, following a little bit different rules because they're a different body. But by the end of the month in May, we'll have a Senate budget, which will look different than the House for a lot of reasons. So the House and the Senate will have to come to agreement on one identical budget. They'll do that through what's called a conference committee, and we'll get that to the governor, hopefully before July 1st, but often a little bit after. And then she gets to review it, and she has a certain period of time, usually about 10 days, to make her decision on whether she accepts it, she rejects it, or she can also reject specific line items. And she can actually veto budget line items individually. If she vetoes budget line items, we'll have another 10 days to come back and override those vetoes and maintain them and keep them in track. Any questions? Really?
We do have one question about education, but I think if you finish your process, we'll come back to specific issues.
Okay, sounds good. So this is the state budget process. And again, starts in January. It's already been going on, but it's coming close to the time when the House is going to start dealing with their budget. And then it's a baton. We give it to the Senate. They take care of what they're doing. Now, people have said to me, how are we addressing all the heartache that the Trump administration is giving to programs and funding and money for states? At this point, this budget is being based totally on what we're expecting to have revenue in the state of Massachusetts based on what the revenue projections have been, with an awareness that there are certain pieces of the budget that have already been targeted by the administration as vulnerable. But we're not looking to fill those gaps just yet until we really assess what those gaps are. So what does that mean? I imagine that we will because the budget passing process happens between the end of April, the end of May, coming back the end of June. There'll probably be lots of information that will come out as that time evolves that will have to be factored into each body's discussion. So the Senate may have more information on how Massachusetts is getting whacked, for example, by the federal government than we have because of the time frame. And so they may have to take the first action on doing that. But then it'll all get sorted out in conference committee. And of course, it'll continue to happen because I think it's not just what the Trump administration is doing deliberately against programs and funding, but I think we'll have to see what happens with tariffs and how that affects the economy and how that affects our revenue projections. So there's a lot of question marks. And as many of you know, the economy doesn't like uncertainty as much as we individually don't like it. So we'll have to see. I've been telling people the most important thing is to stay flexible and we're going to have to pivot. We just don't know what we're pivoting to and from where. So how do you advocate in the budget? Right now, we're getting tons of emails that tell us exactly what line item people want to have at what amount and why that program is meaningful to them. And that's what I advise you to do. And you can do that with House and Senate members now through June. Obviously, for me, the most important time is to get those emails now before we discuss a budget. And the Senate is after the, is during May. But we're gonna have to come together and discuss this anyway. So I say include us both as soon as you can. The best way to find out, so a lot of people say, well, how do I know how much to ask for? Almost every program and budget line item in the budget has an advocacy stakeholder group. So that could be ARP, or that could be the Independent Living Centers, or the Mass Teachers Association, or the Small Businesses Association, the Association of Independent Manufacturers. There's a million stakeholders. That's an over-exaggeration, but there are a lot of stakeholders. Try to think about, okay, I'm very involved and interested in this topic, and then think about, but I don't know what I would ask for, but who would know what they're going to ask for? And then think about stakeholders, and we might be able to help you with that. So for example, I'm concerned about food security and hunger. And those are the programs, they're a priority for me in the statewide budget. So I'm going to go, and I go to the Food Bank of Western Massachusetts, the Amherst Survival Center, Neighbors Helping Neighbors in South Hadley, and the Greater Boston Food Bank. And I say, what's on your list? What do you need? And sometimes I don't always agree with them. I have to tell you, like the Greater Boston Food Bank, the amount of money they're putting in for their food budget has not changed, even though we know that USDA has cut programs. So I'm asking for more money. I don't know if I'll get it, but I'm going to ask for more money than they're asking for, because I already know that food banks and food pantries are getting cut by the USDA. But that's what I mean by here's the program, who's the most affected, go on their website, give them a call, ask to talk to their government affairs person, and find out what are their budget priorities at the state. You could ask us, but we may not have heard from them, so we might not know. Okay. In the budget, every funding has a line item. That's the second bullet. That's really important, because when I'm going to either put an amendment in on a budget item, or I'm going to look for an amendment on a program, it's going to be by this line item. So that becomes an important piece, and advocates will have that. Okay. Wait, let's start with budget. Any questions about budget? Again,
Not yet.
Okay, am I speaking too fast? Give me a thumbs like this or up, down, whatever you feel like. It's okay? Okay, we'll continue.
I'm getting nods and thumbs up that I can see.
Great, thank you, Susan.
Mhm.
Okay, so that's the budget. And for the most part, over the next, I'd say 3 weeks, my office is going to be very, very involved with budget stuff. And that doesn't even include the supplemental budget that just came out on the fair share money that we have to deal with today. There'll also be another supplemental budget at one point that'll be called a closeout supplemental. That'll help us make sure that we paid all our bills before the end of the year. And then there's the FY26 Massachusetts budget. I want to give you one kind of cautionary word about the Massachusetts budget this year, and it relates to what Trump is doing. A lot of our budget, 20 to 30%, depending on who you talk to, is tied up with Medicaid or Mass Health dollars. Medicaid in Massachusetts is known as Mass Health. And that means that if that program, Medicaid from the federal government, gets whacked very badly, meaning it gets hit and cut severely, it will ripple through the Massachusetts budget in every program. So even if a program has not been hit by the federal government that's in our budget, if Mass Health gets hit, it will affect the entire budget. So just be aware if you hear that's coming. That will make it harder to fund a lot of the different programs that we have, because Massachusetts, as you know, has a very robust social service infrastructure. And it's based on revenue, It's based on really good budgeting, and it's also based on a federal partner, and we've lost our federal partner. Okay, so I don't mean to be dire, but that's the reality. Okay, so that's happening. Meanwhile, back at that fork on the road, the other way takes us to the legislation in the 2-year cycle. And the journey of legislation is quite the thing. So here it is laid out in a kind of a roadmap, right? You file it every year in January as soon as people get sworn in. We ask our colleagues for co-sponsorship. That shows that there's support for a bill. You, as a resident, can ask me as your rep to co-sponsor bills that you want to see get supported. And I look at every bill that a constituent asks me to co-sponsor, and I decide if it's a bill that I can co-sponsor. If it is, I go on it. If it's not, I'll explain why it isn't to the person who asked me. And it might be, although this hasn't happened, that I've had, let's say I get asked to support a bill that would ban abortion in Massachusetts. I wouldn't co-sponsor that bill. And I wouldn't co-sponsor it because the majority of my constituents don't agree with it. But people can still ask me to co-sponsor it. That's the nature of the relationship between rep and constituent. Bills will be scheduled for public hearings. In Massachusetts right now, we have hybrid hearings, and I expect that we will have them this session, meaning that you can participate in person at the State House or virtually, like on an equivalent Zoom platform. You can also participate in writing by sending in testimony and support. I would encourage you, if you want to send in testimony and support, you can either send it to me and I'll forward it to the committee, or CC me on it so I know that there's an issue that you're concerned about. So it's on my radar. The hearing has limits on how much people can speak, usually 2 to 3 minutes, depending on how many people want to speak on it. And right now, both the House and the Senate are considering a rule that would make most testimony public. So just keep your eye on that. How do you find out where the hearing is? We're going to talk about the Mass Legislature website at the end. I'm going to put it in the chat though right now. It is an important website to check out. It gives you not only the schedule of hearings, but it gives you the hearing webpage. So that gives you the directions on how to submit testimony and how to participate. And it lets you watch the hearing on that same page. So it's a great website to look at. The committee will then poll the bill. This means that House members will be polled, Senate members will be polled, because we have joint committees, House and Senate together. And they'll basically be, the chair of the committee will recommend an action. And the action can either be that the bill gets advanced as is, the bill gets advanced in a modified version, the bill goes to study, meaning it's not ready for prime time, and so it needs a little bit more work, or it can be denied. Very rarely does a bill get denied. It's sort of like, a scarlet letter kind of thing. I don't think anybody really wants to mark someone else's bill with a no, you can't do this. It'll go to study. And that will basically kill the bill for this session. You can refile it the next session and try to get more support, find out what was wrong with it, why the committee didn't think they could change it and make it better, and make it a better bill. So one thing I've learned about the legislative process, it's really about, this is where consensus building is really going to hit the road and be the thing that either makes a bill into a law or doesn't. So the committee will have a decision. Let's say they advance it. It'll go out to Ways and Means with advance. Now you're going to see this joint rule 10-day. That may all change. In previous sessions, committees had until I think it was the first Wednesday of the second February of the session, crazy way to think about it, as joint rule 10-day, which was, that's the deadline by which the committee has to make a decision on the bill. You can get extensions, but it was a way to say enough. There's enough conversation, enough discussion. You've had enough time to review the bill, make a decision. My mother would have said, it's time to get off the pot, make a decision. And so But that day will probably happen earlier, because remember what I said, we're trying to expedite the process of moving legislation through the building, and that means we need to have an earlier deadline. So stay tuned for more information on that. If it has to go to another committee, it'll go to another committee. If bills include healthcare financing related issues, they'll go to healthcare financing. If they require bank issues, they may go to financial services before they go to Ways and Means. Then they come to Ways and Means, and then there's more advocacy that has to happen there to get it to come out of Ways and Means to come to a vote in both chambers. And remember, if it gets voted on in the House and not in the Senate, it dies. If it gets voted in the Senate and doesn't come for a vote in the House, it dies. If it stays in Ways and Means and never comes for a vote, it dies. So there's, what was I told when I first came in? I was told there's one way for a bill to become a law, but there's 1,000 ways to kill it. So let that be a lesson to you. Once it gets signed by both the House and the Senate and voted on, whether it's initially or through a conference committee as one identical bill, only then can it go to the governor for her signature. So it has to be approved by both houses identically. Then Governor Healy gets a decision whether she will sign it or not. So the legislative journey, I'm going to put up a couple of picture slides here. It can be checkers or it can be chess. Mostly it's, quite frankly, chess, because you have to anticipate these other committees that are going to be weighing in, who have other people who may have other ideas about what your bill wants. But a lot of people think of it as just checkers. You just have to get to the other side. But it's more complicated than that. And when I say complicated, I mean it's a little bit more like Chutes and Ladders or Candyland or Battleship. That kind of complicated. There's a lot of pitfalls. There's a lot of unexpected things that can happen. There are a lot of ways that it can get off track. And there's a lot of ways, if we're looking at this one on the far right, that people can block it and make trouble for your bill if they wanted to. So it's a journey. The best thing I can tell you as individuals is try to find the organizations that are advocating for the same things you want and connect to them and their efforts if you believe in them and if you agree with them, because that will amplify your voice. Any questions? No? We're going through this kind of fast, everyone. You're going to have to ask me some questions. So.
Well, there are, you've answered one, but we might want to review the website again about where to find the date of hearings on the bill, and that's malegislature.gov.
That's coming up soon. Thank you, Susan.
Yep, and there's also, I think it's related, how can we find out line items of a budget?
Well, when the budget comes out, it's a document that you can get off of the website, and you can see the line items are printed right on the budget. But I think the easier way is what I was describing. Think about who are the stakeholders for that line item and reach out to them. They probably have already done the calculus in terms of what's the line item and how much do they really want in that line. Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. So legislative advocacy, which many of you I'm sure have already done. And I'm just keeping my eye on the clock because in 4 minutes, I just want to make sure that my amendments are in for the supplemental. The best way to advocate for legislation is to tell the legislator why it's important to you. It's really, the secret sauce is you. The secret sauce is your experience, your ideas, your feelings, your observations, your insights. You're the secret sauce, nothing else, okay? For most part, even though I heard recently that Elon Musk said terrible things about empathy, empathy is the most important thing in legislation. It's not the most important thing in signing executive orders because that doesn't take much of anything except a Sharpie pen. But when it comes to legislation and advocacy, empathy is everything. And I'm here to tell you that most legislators, if not all, got into public service and they have a high level of empathy. So you need to connect to them in that way. So my advice on legislative advocacy is very similar if you've written grants. Describe the problem that you think the legislation solves And what is the proposed remedy? It's probably the policy, a program, a commission, an intervention. Talk about why that would solve the problem, or why it would start to solve the problem, or why it would raise awareness about the problem. Give your personal narrative to underscore both the problem and or the solution. So it could be, I've never experienced this, but I've heard from friends that blank, or it could be, in my experience, I wish that we had had blank, because that would have been better and I would have been better served. Remember to always have the bill number. You're advocating for a bill, make sure you have the bill number. And I'm going to tell you something else. Make sure you find out if the legislator is already on the bill. I've gotten advocacy in the past 2 weeks from advocates on bills that either I'm already on or I filed. And the fact that they didn't know either thing wasn't impressive, right? If you're going to go talk to somebody and say, I really hope that you'll get on this bill, you don't want to hear them say, I'm already on that bill. Why didn't you check it before you came to talk to me? Because the advocacy changes. If I'm already on the bill that you want, then when you come to talk to me, what are you going to say to me? Thank you. I'm so glad you're on that bill, and here's why. You can still educate me about why you think it was important to do it, but the context of the conversation is different. So, and we'll talk in a moment about how you can find that information. So you also want to know what is the bill status, and we'll talk about that with the legislature website will help you figure that out, because it may be scheduled for a hearing like next week, or it might have just had a hearing. And if you're advocating, you're going to want to track it to see where your advocacy is in relationship to what the status is. Okay. So this is the legislature's website. This is what it'll look like when you pull it up. And I want to show you a couple different things on this. So it has all the bills and laws. It has information on where we are in the budget process. And when the budget gets passed, it'll also have the budget there. It has a list of all the legislators. And that also, if you click that link, there's also a thing that says find my legislator. So let's say you have a friend who lives in, let's say Warren, and you don't know who their legislator is, but they're like, yeah, I'll call them up and tell them to support that bill. So they go into legislators and they go find my legislator, and it pops up, it's a map. They put in their address and it tells them who their state senator and state rep is, and they're linked to that state rep and that state senator's webpage, so they can get their phone number and their email address. Really simple. Lots of ways to coordinate it. It tells you the hearings and events schedule. It also tells you all the committees. You click that, all the committees, it'll say joint committees, House committees, Senate committees. I encourage you to look at joint committees, because that's where a lot of the hearing action will take place. And you can see not only all the committees, but if you click on one, you'll get all the information. So you'll get who are the chairs, who are the members, what are the bills that have gone to that committee. And as the committee takes action, that webpage will report on the action, what hearings took place and when. Susan, do you mind if I run off for just one moment? Thank you, everybody. Stay with me.
I'm going to pause the recording and we'll start it up again in a couple of minutes.
Okay, thank you, everybody. Okay. Susan, can you fix the slides, or should I don't know what happened here with the slides. Okay. Do people see all the slides or just one slide?
I see one slide. It's still the
Okay.
malegislature.gov.
Great. I also want to show you some other things on this slide, on this homepage. So you can see on the left side, there's a Senate page and a House page, again, legislators. There's all the bills. There's the general laws, which is important because that's how we make legislations. We mend the general laws. There's the Massachusetts Constitution, which is an important document. On the top, you'll see State House. So you can search a bill. You can search a bill by number. You can search a bill by its filer. So like if you put Mindy Domb in the search, then you'd get to my page, and then you'd see all the bills that I filed and all the bills that I've co-sponsored. And you can also sometimes look for bills with key words. So for example, climate might be a word that would pull up a lot of legislation. Education might be a word that would do it. That kind of thing, technical assistance, public health. That's not really a screening, but that'll pull up a lot of things. I also want to point out this little person icon on the upper right-hand corner with the star. This is something called My Legislature. I'm going to write it into the chat. And for anybody who's interested in that, you can certainly email me. This is a way for you to develop kind of like your own dashboard on this website. Unfortunately, it doesn't notify you when your bill is scheduled for a hearing, but when you go in and you put bills that you're interested in, when they're scheduled for hearings, it'll show up on your page. You still have to go in and check. It doesn't like ding you and ring you and say, go check your page. But if you're checking it on a regular basis, you'll get lots of information. And it's a really good service that I highly recommend that people check out. I'm going to move the site. So for example, when you look on the committees, currently there's a joint committee on elder affairs. They may be changing their name, I think, but the joint rules have not been agreed upon yet. And so the name hasn't been changed, but you can see it has House contact, Senate contact. And you see the menu here, it says members, bills, about. So the bills would be all the bills that have been filed in that committee underneath. The members would list all the members, and the about would be what is the description of the committee? What is its charge? So for example, the committee that I'm a chair of, mental health, substance use, and recovery, the charge is to review all legislation dealing with those issues and oversight over the Department of Mental Health and the Bureau of Substance Addiction Services. So every committee has its own charge, and depending on how many bills they're looking at, they may only get to review the bills, or they may also be able to do some of their oversight work. Any questions on that? Okay. So these are some of the bills that have been filed in the Committee on Elder Affairs. And so I'm just going to look at the second one, an act establishing a commission on aging disabled adults. Commissions are, like, people have said to me that they think, commissions don't mean anything and why do people do it? I love commissions if they're really like focused and have the right people on them, because the commission actually does the work then that's necessary on like a complicated topic that then can be handed over like a gift almost to the committee to be able to do legislation later on. Remember, we don't have as much assistance as like Congress has in developing legislation. I have 2 staff people and there are 3 committee staff people, which is a lot. But some people only have 1 staff person and some committees only have 1 staff person. So the amount of work that's necessary to develop good legislation sometimes takes a little bit more of a village, and a commission can act that way. But you can see some of the other ones. I'll read them off in case people can't see them. There's an act relative to LGBT and HIV positive seniors in the Commonwealth, an act supporting seniors' financial stability, an act relative to the LGBTQ Aging Commission, an act establishing the Hospital to Home Partnership Program. This is a program that would put a person in every hospital in Massachusetts who would be a patient's liaison to getting home care services as a way to avoid further institutionalization if they want to. An act establishing the program of all-inclusive care for the elderly, an act to strengthen the state home care program workforce. This is a bill that would try to get some parity between the people who work in state-funded programs and private programs in terms of how much they get paid, as a way to incentivize more people going to work in the private sector, who often scooped up by the state. And an act relative to Massachusetts. But you can see it says displaying 51 to 74 of 74 bills. That means that in this committee, there have been 74 bills filed. And so they'll have to do hearings to address those bills. They'll be sorted by topic, and everybody, including everybody on this call, will have an opportunity to speak out on a bill of their choice. Okay, any questions? Now we have to have questions. Let's stop sharing this for a moment. Oop, I don't know how to do that, but we're going to try and do that. I'm not sure how to do that. I don't know. So I'm sorry, I can't not share.
You're not sharing now.
I'm not sharing now?
You're back to the regular screen.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
I think
didn't
I did
know.
it with you,
I
Mindy.
don't know what I did,
We're
but
good.
so I guess what I want to say in summation in terms of advocating for legislation is that website is your friend. But here too, the stakeholder and advocacy organizations are really important. Advocacy is really an inside building, outside building effort. Inside the building, legislators are informing each other, making each other aware, building coalitions. And outside the building, they're getting more and more voters to be involved, more and more residents, and they're also putting pressure on legislators to get involved. So you become essential, not only in galvanizing the Commonwealth to support a particular bill, but then to get those individuals to contact their legislators to get them to support the bill. And that's democracy right there. But I really love questions.
Okay, so I'm going to go back to a question that came in pretty early about the Secretary of Education and rural aid school formula. And I'm guessing that this person, we should probably ask this person to look up the advocacy groups and the particular bills, but are there other things that people can do to lobby state officials?
That's a great question, and it's a great question for this topic. This is a really important topic. This is to look at the way Massachusetts funds schools through a formula that's called the Chapter 70 formula, and how that formula particularly isn't so great for districts like Amherst. And there is a need to redo the formula so that districts like Amherst aren't penalized for what they are by getting less money than they deserve. A couple of years ago, right after I got elected, the legislature took up something called the Student Opportunity Act. I don't know if you've heard of that. It's called the SOA, or the Student Opportunity Act. And it was a way to look at the Chapter 70 formula and look at it through the eyes of cities and low-income individuals who were not getting their fair share in these underserved areas. At the time, you might have heard the expression where people said, the kind of education you get in Massachusetts should not be determined by your zip code, right? And that actually was what was happening. So we passed the Student Opportunity Act, which had a lot of different provisions. And one of them was to try to level the playing field between the inner city and everybody else. And it's actually done pretty well. It's a 5-year program. It'll be done next year, and then it'll probably have to be renewed again. We need to do that again, but not for those towns. Now we need to look at who did the Student Opportunity Act leave out. And that Student Opportunity Act left out communities like Amherst. So there are some bills that look at Chapter 70, but right now, the reason why this is such an interesting topic to bring out is that the legislative advocacy that has to happen on this is an awareness advocacy in the building, that there is a need to relook at Chapter 70 again, to incorporate many communities that were left out of the Student Opportunity Act. So that's one piece. The rural school aid is a little bit of a different story because that's more of a budgetary matter. Rep Natalie Blay, who many of you may know, or she may be your rep. She's represents Deerfield, Sunderland, Leverett, I believe, just north of us. She's been incredibly active and so effective in raising the issue of rural school aid and the importance of getting more money for rural schools. People in Amherst will sometimes ask me, why are you involved with rural schools? We're not a rural district. That's true. Amherst isn't a rural district, but our region includes rural districts. And the more money we get for those districts lifts all boats. And also, quite frankly, I'm a believer in if something's unfair, I should be supporting making it more fair. But in this case, it also means that it helps Amherst because it helps the people who are in the regional school district. But this is more of a budget line item. And so you're going to see in the next couple of weeks, there's going to be more discussion about the House budget. And it's probably going to be Rep Lay is going to have to submit an amendment where she's going to try to increase the amount of money that's in the budget for rural school aid. And so we'll continue to make that fight. She led a commission last session, I think. It might have been the session before, on rural school aid and why more was needed. If you're interested in that report, please email me and let me know. I'd be happy to share it with you. She did such great work with what was needed, specifically what budget lines were needed. Before, I think last session, we didn't even have a rural school aid line item. We had rural transportation, but not rural school aid. But we got that into the budget, and we have to keep increasing the amount of money for that line. And so I think, like, when you think about, in that case, the advocates and the stakeholders are really the legislator leaders who are leading that fight. Did I answer the question from the person? If I didn't and you need a follow-up, please ask me a follow-up.
That came in on the text a while ago, so I'll let you know if that followed up. In the
Okay.
meantime, Elisa has raised her hand, and I think you've unmuted yourself. Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead, Elisa.
Thanks. I'm a big supporter of death with dignity. And that bill has been buried by the legislature for a dozen years now. I don't know if you can, I think it's difficult for our representatives to speak candidly about how things actually work in the legislature. I am personally convinced that there are some people who in the legislature whose opinion matters 10 times more than yours. Not to be mean to you, but you know. But what can we do to get that moved? I mean, 60 to 70% of people in Massachusetts support this.
Well, that's true, but sadly, 60 to 70% of the people in Massachusetts haven't contacted their legislators and insisted they support it. The math is, you know, I'm not going to tell you my voice is as important as everybody else, because I think that's kind of obnoxious if I said that. And, you know, I mean, I'm technically considered in leadership because I'm a chair of a committee. But I also think that politics is like math, you know, it's about numbers. Who has the numbers, basically? So let me talk a little bit about this bill. When I ran for office in 2018, this was like the #1 bill that I was asked about. I mean, almost everywhere I went, house parties, debates, you know, just on the street holding a sign, whatever. I was asked about this bill. So I knew this bill was a priority for my constituents. I knew I'd be signing on and sending in support. It just had a public hearing. I don't know if you know that, last week. And so if anybody on this call is interested, now is the time to send in your support letters for the bill. And again, here I would say, you could either send them to me and I'll forward them to the committee. That's a great way to do it, because then the committee sees that I have a stake in it in addition to my own support letter. Or you can go on the Mass Legislature website and find the webpage for the bill, and it'll show you the directions on how to submit testimony. I'm happy to share, so you could send it to me. But if you support this bill, now's the time to do it. And this is a bill that I can't stress that formula for advocacy enough. What's the problem and what's the solution and why is it important to you? You know, the hearings are filled with people who are talking about either who have lost loved ones who wish that the bill was in place, or who are sick and want to know that the bill is in place, or who just are anticipating someday I might be, and I want this power. But the only reason I can tell you why it hasn't come to the floor is I don't think there's enough people who are clamoring for it in the legislature, because I don't think enough people across the state have clamored for it. In Western Mass, there's a big voice for it. Absolutely. But I don't know if that voice is as loud in other parts of the state. I don't know. I mean, I'm saying that it could be, but I don't hear it. So, and I don't see it necessarily at the hearings. It could be in writing, right? Because you can send in testimony in writing. But I think this is really, we need to do more, bigger and better organizing. The bill is really a good bill. You know, for a while, the bill wasn't moving because the lack of consensus was in part due to the fact that there were a lot of people who are disabled who were very concerned about safeguards that would be put into place so that it couldn't be used against people with disabilities. The committees worked on that, and they came up with some safeguards that everybody could agree on. That actually, to me, shows you that the legislative process was working there, right? Because there was a group of people who said, whoa, 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 we get a little nervous if a doctor has complete, authority in this situation, that could be taken advantage of. So they had to work that out. They did work that out. And the committee, under like Joe's leadership in large part, when she was chair of public health, worked out a lot of they're not really kinks, they were like legitimate concerns with the bill. So that it has great safeguards in it now, but it still needs more support. So I think, I'm sorry, Alyssa, I don't think it's only that my voice isn't as powerful as other people's voice. I think we don't have as many voices as we need. So my advice is, if you know people in other parts of the state, encourage them to reach out to their legislators. Recognize that since the hearing happened early, this is a good sign. Early hearings are designed to give bills lots of runway, lots of opportunity to come to the floor, lots of opportunity for advocacy. So the fact that it was early is an indication to me, because it's been advanced by committee. It's been, and it's stopped there, is that they're trying to move it to Ways and Means, and that's where the advocacy will have to be. People will have to write to Ways and Means to try to get a vote on the floor. I promise you, if it comes for a vote, I'm voting yes. Thank you. Thanks for raising it.
Thank you. And we have a question from Norma that sort of ties into this, I think. She's asking, is it true that it's not worthwhile to write to a legislature other than your own? She doesn't think that individual legislators get advocacy letters from non-district members.
Well, in my office, I don't respond to people who aren't constituents. I figure you're paying me. You get my time, you get my thoughts, you get my, every time you respond to an email, it's time. I do an automatic reply, and in my automatic reply, I say, if you don't live in Amherst or this part of Granby, find your legislator and let them know, and I give them the link. But I tend not to respond to individuals who are writing to me from other parts of the state. I really feel like the people of Amherst and Granby are my boss. That's who I have to be available to. I don't know if other legislators do. I think the etiquette is you don't. The etiquette is, some legislators may forward the emails to the right legislator. I don't do that. I have the automatic response instead. We get a lot of emails, so I worry about how much time, what a time sink that would be to do that. But this is why it's so important when you write to your legislator, include your address. Because if you don't include your address, they're going to assume you're not a constituent, right? Because otherwise then they have to find their address. Then it's a whole nother time sink. So the most important thing I can tell you is, if you're writing to your legislator, not only sign your name, sign your address and your town and state. People have said to me recently, is it more important to do a handwritten letter or email? For my office, they're the same. Email's probably better because I'm going to get it quicker. Postage, I can't really guarantee you. The State House mail room is pretty slow, and the USPS is not as reliable as it once was. So I'm like, you don't have to send it to me unless you want me to see, or, unless you want to write out something, which is your prerogative. You can send an email, it'll get treated just the same. The other question I get about this is, do you want my individual email, or is it okay if I sign on to one of these group emails that come out? And the group emails that come out include the addresses, so that's good. Except they do also say to me that you haven't told me why it's important to you. You're going on to why it's important to lots of people. I still want to hear about why it's important to you. So they're important, and they're actually, we look at them and we read them and we see how many people have sent them in for sure. And that tells us what the level of advocacy is. But the advocacy itself may not be as powerful as if somebody wrote to me on their own. Here's another question. If your legislator already agrees with you, should you be telling them that you support something they're doing? Yes. First of all, feedback is like essential. You're the boss. You have to tell the legislator, whether it be me or Joe or somebody else, what we're doing that you like, that you don't like, what you wish we were doing. And at the same time, you're telling us what issues are of interest to you. And that makes us better advocates in the State House. So I definitely say, write to us, tell us what you want us to do. And if you know that we're already doing it, then write us, I know you're already doing this and I'm glad you are because fill in the blank. It helps us know what our constituents are interested in, and that keeps us sort of focused on that advocacy.
Okay, so, and to me, it sounds like the last two questions kind of tie together, that you were mentioning that if else, Elisa knows people in other parts of the state, help them send in letters to the
And
other
their
reps.
Exactly.
Elsa gets counted with you and Elsa's friend gets counted with whoever.
Well, that's the thing, right? And she knows that I'm already on the bill. So
Mhm.
the letter to me is, thank you, this bill means so much to me and this is why. I'm glad you're on the bill. Please stay strong, keep advocating for it, right? You want to tell me, I appreciate that you're co-sponsored the bill and that you're advocating for it. I hope you'll do whatever you can to get it out of Ways and Means, or to get it to Ways and Means, right? You can give me another, remember that Shoots and Ladders, there's lots more steps. But also probably equally as important is if you know somebody in another part of state who also cares about it, help them contact their legislators, rep and senator. There's two bills on this particular issue and on many issues. They're identical. One's a House bill, one's a Senate bill. And ask their legislators to co-sponsor it and start educating to them about why it's important to them. Super important.
Thank you. I see no other questions in the chat. If somebody does have a question, please raise your hand. Sandy, if we don't get another question or two, I think we'll close down in just a minute, but I wanted to touch base if you had anything else.
No, I'm good to go.
Okay, other questions?
Was this helpful for folks? Yes? Okay.
Okay, Martha, thank you for stepping forward. Go ahead and ask your question. Oops, you're muted. There, now you're unmuted.
Thank
Okay.
you. First of all, Mindy, thank you for all your efforts on Saturday. You helped lead two different protests, and then you went and you helped serve at the Survival Center and all. So I hope you had some rest yesterday. But
I did kind of crash yesterday.
yeah, but I just wanted to follow up your last statement where you said, it's important that you really focus on your own legislators. What about if a bill is then before a particular committee? Is it useful to write, in addition to your legislator, write to the chair of that committee?
Yes. Thank you for asking that, Martha. Yes. Remember, the public hearings are the chance for the committee to hear from you. That, and the geography doesn't matter then. It's just about the bill. So let's say Bill XYZ that you cared a lot about went over to the Economic Development Committee, right? And so you would write to me and Joe, and you might say, could you please co-sponsor Bill XYZ? It means a lot to me because ABC, right? And then you could also write to the chair, you could follow the bill on the website. And when it got a public hearing, you could either schedule yourself to testify for 3 minutes or write a letter to that chairperson and say, the letter's a little different. It's more like, I really support XYZ, here's why. I urge you to advance the bill from your committee favorably. That's what you're asking committees to do. And then I'm going to tell you, you should CC Joe and me so that we know you're interested in that bill and you're interested in where it's going. Because then we'll follow it. Sometimes I am able to follow it much more closely than others, but at least I'm aware that I have a constituent that's interested in XYZ, and otherwise I wouldn't know. And this is only going to work, democracy, if I'm representing you. So I need to know what's of interest to you and why, so that I can continue to represent those interests, even if it's not right in front of me. Because a lot of things happen kind of peripherally. Great question. Thank you. And, I have to say about Saturday, if I can just indulge myself for a moment, to me, my Saturday was, at least I think the formula for surviving what's going on with Washington is going to change frequently over the next 2 to 4 years. I think one of the things we have to make sure we do is be flexible and be able to pivot. But right now, my formula for getting through it was like Saturday. It was, you know, activism, protests, getting together with connecting to my community, protecting my community, feeding my community, and celebrating my community. I felt like it checked all the boxes. And so we'll see. I don't know what we'll need to do next, but we'll see what else is up their sleeves.
Okay, we have a couple of comments.
And just remember, you can always reach out and ask our office. If I'm not there, Lily, I'm gonna just put names of staff people in the chat. Lily Stowe Alekman.
Thank you very much, Mindy, for pointing out some of the places for us to find more information on bills that are of interest to us. And I hope you have time for a lovely, quiet dinner tonight, but we're not sure. And oh, thank you. You put in your assistants,
Yeah, my staff.
your staff names in the chat if you would like to reach out to them. Thank you very much, Mindy. And Sandy, anything else?
Nope.
Okay, have a great evening, folks. Get
Thank
those
you,
letter
everybody.
writing hands ready, and thank you very much for attending this session.
Thank you. I look forward to seeing
Thank you.
everybody soon.